Okay, today we've got none other than Sherin Mathew on, who is an incredible entrepreneur and thinker around all things AI ethics. I'm going to let him explain a little bit more about his current position, and then we're going to jump into the full conversation.
I'm Sherin Mathew, founder of AI Technot, one of the largest AI community in the north of UK. I'm an independent advisor, entrepreneur on AI technologies, and I'm here to talk about how we can create a sustainable and accountable future with innovations.
So, if you did not know, Are You a Robot is a series that aims to tackle some of the greatest challenges and questions that arise from AI. And the way that we're doing that is by getting some of the best and brightest minds in the field on here to talk with me about what exactly they're dealing with, how they see the current state of affairs. So there's incredible challenges that we must face with ethical questions around AI and related technologies. And the conversation doesn't just stop here. I want to let you know that, and I want to invite you actually to come to our Slack community where we're continuing conversations around all of these different subjects that we bring up in the podcast or video cast. And if you'd like to join the Slack community, there is a link to that below. Also, I would be amiss if I did not mention our incredible sponsor, EthicsGrade. They are doing some really cutting edge stuff when it comes to AI benchmarking. And if you or your company would like to know what your AI ethics test score is, then give them a shout. You can find all the information to that in the link below also. So now, without further ado, let's talk with Sherin.
Are you a robot?
Sherin, it's great to have you on here. Welcome to Are You a Robot? I am super excited to talk to you about all these different endeavors that you've got going on. And I think it would probably be useful for our listeners to know how you got into AI and how you got into tech, how you got into being where you are right now.
Awesome. No, thank you for this amazing opportunity. Excited to share this with the wider world. I'm a bit of a geek. I think that's the best way to describe myself. So 2 decades ago, doing my undergrad degree, I built a robot myself using assembly language programming, microcontrollers, sensors, and wrote image processing program using VC++. That was a painful project. It took me a year, and it only worked for a minute. And I decided, you know what, my dream of doing robotics and AI is pretty difficult. And I decided I had a job offer from an amazing company called British Telecom, who came to India, recruited graduates in their 3rd year. So I had a job even before I graduated.
Nice.
And I was like, well, this is how it's meant to be. I'm meant to be in the IT world, not in robotics and AI. And I had a dream to build robots for preventing war. We used to see, lots of soldiers, losing their life, and people dying thanks to mine explosion. And surveillance was always, a tricky one, even if you're at home or wherever you are. So I was creating this robot to prevent people from dying or protect people. And I just felt like, I left the dream halfway through. And being in IT world for 15 years, here comes cloud-enabled AI technology. And it just felt like all this GPU conversation, which I was doing in an assembly language 2 decades ago, it all made sense. And it naturally felt like, yeah, this is what I'm meant to do. So I went from IT to data to AI and analytics. And yeah, really, it felt like I was doing something that I've been designed to do or meant to do. And I was fulfilling a purpose. Because of which, so IT world, been in IT world for 15 years, been working with Microsoft consultancies for 6+ years, working with IBM previously on a global scale, delivering large-scale data AI capabilities. And one thing that really drives me is the passion to share knowledge and awareness to the wider world, and how to use technology in a positive way. Yeah.
I think that's such a noble dream that you had, the idea of, hey, how can we make robotics, switch them out, and we just lose robots instead of losing human lives.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a great thing to think about, and why we don't have that fully yet. I mean, I know there's pushes for it.
Yeah.
So, but at the end of the day, it's more of a band-aid for this real problem. Why are we having wars?
Yeah.
That's a whole nother conversation I think we could get into on another podcast that we can do. The idea here, though, that you're speaking about, I mean, I know you have a lot of stuff going on. So it would be helpful if you can orient me on what you're doing and what it's targeting, because you're a pretty prolific guy.
Thank you. So I do a few things. I think to start with, one is the AI community called AI Tech North. We started running a lot of awareness programs, events, summits, conferences, with the purpose of democratizing AI and ethical use of AI and technology. I used to work in London and with large brands across Europe, so Paris, Geneva, Stockholm, and London, of course. And I live in the north of UK, and I could see this digital divide. So AI Tech North's purpose was to actually bridge this digital divide, or lower the barrier of AI adoption. When we were running all of that event, it was community. It ran big event once a year and lots of small events. So we saw that small events were bringing more traction. So we started to talk about everything around AI, like blockchain, smart city, fintech, quantum, all sorts of stuff that kind of links into the advanced innovation, which resulted into a YouTube channel last year called Innovation Exchange. And Innovation Exchange became its own thing. So it was on an AI Tech North website, like a Netflix sort of experience. So Innovation Exchange was running weekly awareness events, pretty much what AI Tech North was doing for the last 3 years. We started doing this on a rapid scale in an agile fashion. And that became a global phenomena because of the name, which is Innovation Exchange, taking the North away from it, it kind of helped. And again, we were getting global attention, which means we had experts from Canada, New York, all the way from Japan and New Zealand sort of coming and sharing knowledge with audience from UK and outside. So it was really a global innovation exchange. So that's another project that I'm currently working on. Pretty much I'm creating a Netflix of technology content and awareness. So that's my project number 2. The third one, which is something that I'm absolutely passionate about, is called public intelligence. Now, for last N number of years, I've been hearing all sorts of, amazing stuff about ethics, responsible AI. And every time I would invite an expert to speak about it, the conversation wouldn't go beyond the point of, it's got to be fair, accountable, someone needs to take an action. So yeah, and it ends there. And I would feel, who's going to do this? And I'm out there thinking, we can do it. And I know what to do it because I come from the implementation pain point perspective. I've seen how to do it. I've seen how not to do it. And I've seen how it made data AI technology help, businesses become, richer or grow more. And I just felt like we need to make this a bit more open, a bit more accessible, and really driven by society instead of other way around. Most of the regulations and the agenda, the toolkit are heavily dictated or driven by, corporate strategies. Governance is playing a catch up, and governance is again advised by corporate leaders. So I think the direction of AI, I felt it was pretty. I would say I don't want to strongly say it's wrong, but I felt like it probably needs other part of that puzzle to be solved, which was people and the society, and society needs to drive this. So public intelligence is an angle or a twist to ethics, where people are driving the ethical and responsible innovation in a democratic fashion.
That's fascinating. And the idea of, AI is a bit misguided,
Yeah.
and the conversations around the ethical parts of it are misguided. And that lines up perfectly. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on here today with what we're doing, right? Like, we're trying to have these conversations and bring them out, bring them to the forefront. And so I'm wondering about public intelligence. How are you going about doing this? How are you, because it's such it's a great point too that you say the conversations were just like, hey, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do this.
Yeah.
But it didn't go deeper into like, here's exact steps that we can take, or here's the next steps, like action items that all of us should be looking at trying to do. So how are you doing that with public intelligence?
So this is something that I've been thinking for over years, and been trying to sort of create this non-functional requirement for ethical AI design. And so the approach that we're taking is first awareness. So we are creating a documentary. So we're working on a documentary which is almost of the scale and impact-wise very similar to Social Dilemma, but around public intelligence. So what happens when public intelligence is breached and all that sort of stuff. So that's one part for awareness. Other thing is we also are writing a white paper with members from IEEE, World Economic Forum, of AI Council UK, and a couple of other influential experts and legal advisors as well. So we're trying to write a white paper around this principle, what this means and how it works and everything. Last but not least, we got a website which will host this toolkit. Toolkit is open, right? So you start from a question on first principle. It will guide you through the design thinking process, which ensures that any innovator, any designer could go through this step by step and embed responsible human rights, fairness, all the stuff that everyone is talking about, but in a practical manner. You could just embed all of this.
And so along those lines, like that embedding, I think, is probably the most interesting, because that's where all of it's very interesting. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to diminish any of that. But what I think is really interesting is the idea of those concrete things that we can be implementing right now, right? Is that, if I'm understanding that correctly, it's like you're saying if anyone wants to come and apply this design thinking to make sure that they're meeting the standards, they can. And so what I'm wondering is, like, how can we do that? Can you explain to me how that plays out? Is it someone like a consultant comes in, or is it just like a PDF you download?
So no, it's again open. So you probably don't need a consultant unless you want some extreme advice on some of the principles or particular objectives that you need to meet. But it's open. So you and I, if you want to design an AI solution, what we don't have is the global society's view and requirements, right? Because this is lacking. Any innovator who goes out there, I'm going to throw in a few names. Tesla, right? Tesla went and decided to build this driverless car. Tesla probably did not consider the non-functional requirements, the global requirements, or requirements where the key stakeholders will be impacted, which is us as a people and taxi drivers, for example, right? Yeah. So it really ensures in the design thinking process, how are you taking these measures, right? And we have 5 principles. The first one, I think, which makes this the entire public intelligence, sort of, it makes sense. The first principle is what makes complete sense, and it's the foundational principle, which is right to intelligence. Right to intelligence is when you create artificial intelligence, you're actually creating artificial human intelligence. From an intellectually speaking, or from an intellectual perspective, that intelligence did not exist. Someone was doing that, or someone owned it, right? Mm-hmm. So it's ensuring that your principle one, or your first criteria, is what are you trying to create, right? And what are you trying to augment, or what are you trying to displace? And it really gives them some guidance in terms of how you should shape your AI. And if it was to say, I'm going to create a driverless car that's going to go out there and really run taxi company independently. Now that is concerning, right? Ethically and from a social perspective, you are disrupting an ecosystem of taxi drivers. There's a governance around it, i.e., there's DVLA, there's licensing council, and everything around it. They got family, there's livelihood associated to it, and there's a future generation waiting to take that job as well, right? So the right to intelligence really sort of makes you think about all of this before you start innovating. And the next step is, how do you manage the displacement of intelligence? Yeah. Now, there are different types of AI technology that displaces in different ways and in different manner. Some displace at scale. Okay, so let's say a smartphone, billions of people have it, right? Once it was launched. There could be another AI that's flipping burgers, right? So you can imagine the scale of flipping burger will be small, and the impact might be low, and the speed at which it impacts as well, right? So we factor all of this in displacement, and also the depth of displacement. Flipping burger, the depth is probably just at the kitchen level, right? Mm-hmm. And someone will be happy to let robot do the flipping. Whereas if there was a robotic surgeon, the depth of this displacement is pretty serious. There's medical, schools, universities. There's certification process. There's junior doctor process of getting to that level.
Yeah, textbooks.
Textbooks.
Professors. Yeah,
exactly. You're disrupting the entire ecosystem. So
even tooling. Yeah, I can see that.
And the governance process around it as well, right? It's all complicated, and people have invested time and energy around it. So displacement calculates all this, and also the wastage that we create. Now we say, driverless car is sustainable, but think about it. When it goes out there, you got to calculate the CO2 emissions of displacing a particular car or workforce, and emotional and physical and climatic disruption that it creates. So the list goes on. So it really makes you think, and this is something that we serve on a platter, so that it really helps people who are trying to prototype or go MVP with AI and don't have the budget to get this sort of foundational toolkit or requirements in place to sort of think that way right from the start.
So it's the ability to ask different kinds of questions and not just assume. Yeah. And so bringing in that framework will help them to understand that. And I'm wondering about, like, to your point of, let's take Tesla again for the example. And when they start to look at, hey, this new technology that we're creating is going to displace a lot of people. Well, what is the solution there for them? Because it's not like they're going to say, okay, we'll stop creating technology, we'll stop innovating. And so is that more along the side of the other step where you're talking about, okay, what's the level of depth in this displacement and how do you offset that?
And I think I really want to quote, I think it was Elon Musk who said this, where, the regulations are not ready and AI could be the end of civilization. I think that's what he said. And I think what's upsetting is, people know, smart people know, guys like Bill Gates and Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking, they know what this could lead into. What we haven't done is we haven't given society the power. I think it's just been that, there's no repercussions or consequences of building this. No one's calling it out. People are just accepting. So when you install Facebook or WhatsApp, you just have one choice. I agree. And you have to agree to use it. And there's no other way. There's not a single line of agreement that goes from people to the innovators. So what I've done with public intelligence is I've changed the table around in a way that these principles, all five. So the first one is right to intelligence. Second one is called displacement protection. Third one is called risk evaluation. And then there is purpose-driven design. And the last one is accountable redesign. Now, that last one is the key and the most important one. So first and last, they really tie everything together. The redesign is, if you were to do a greenfield or build a greenfield AI solution, yeah, you got this requirement right in front of you. So we've done the hard work for you to just get started in an ethical, responsible fashion. All the requirements are there in front of you. If you have already built a solution like Tesla or Facebook, you always will do an update, software update. You will do a next release. And this is your opportunity to accountably redesign. And when you redesign, you go through this process, and all of this assessment, all these 5 principles and the questions or directions underneath, objectives underneath, are transparent, which means you can see what Tesla is saying or doing or designing. And it is public. It's like public GitHub of your AI design, really. And if you and I went in and said, how's Tesla performing from an ethical perspective, they have this overall score of all the objectives, if they are met or not. And if they need advice, we can offer advice as well. But it's all straightforward. So what happens with this is, going back to one of the principles, which is around the purpose-driven and accountability, it ensures that, okay, fine, you designed the solution. What are you doing to prevent things like social disruption? Okay, what are you doing so that you don't give intellectual advantage to one particular entity? And that entity could be a business or someone who shouldn't be owning all of this. So imagine if Tesla allowed anyone to have any number of driverless cars. Intellectually speaking, you can only drive one car at a time, right? What would happen if everyone was allowed to drive as many cars as they like? That's where the problem starts. Uber could do the same, because Uber has 4 million taxis under their name. Not literally, they don't own it, but they subscribe to that service. And when they subscribe to that service, they subscribe to their intelligence, taxi drivers' intelligence to drive. Uber hasn't got that capability, right? They are a disruptive platform. They don't own a taxi. They don't own a taxi driver. So if there's a policy that said, one person, one car, intellectually speaking, you can drive one at a time, you can own 3, they really need to think about this. And technically speaking, driver ID could be managed. If you can do AI, you can manage a driver ID and have one driver ID active at a time, right? So they really got to design in a way that they're honoring people, society, the displacement, the sustainability side of things as well.
So I like this idea of the GitHub and making things transparent for the rest of the world and showing what different companies are doing as far as their AI programs and how they're managing to be ethical about that. And so it seems to me like there's a few different people, and maybe it's just because I talk to people like this on a daily basis, right? And so it's a very interesting field that's starting to emerge. And I think a lot of people are calling for that, more transparency.
Yeah.
We want to see what's going on, and we want to see how you're answering these difficult questions. And so I see many different ways of going about that, right? Like one that you just mentioned is your framework. I've also heard frameworks about auditing. I've also heard grading systems. How do you feel this is going to evolve over time? Like, is it going to be something where all of these just kind of standardize on one? Is it going to be the government steps in and says, hey, this is how it's got to be. Here's some regulations around it. I mean, we're seeing in the EU is starting to try and push through more regulations and starting to have, they know that this needs to happen. And like you said, regulation goes so slow that it's like playing catch up. And it's not, we're not at the place yet where we can say, okay, the regulations are solid. And nor do I wonder if we will ever be at that place, right? Where we can say, okay, regulations are good. we're in a good place, like because technology, and especially in this sector, it moves so fast. So what are your thoughts on how that will consolidate, or how that will play out in the next couple years, or even decade?
Yeah, so our plan was to empower innovators, designers, technologists, even governing bodies to really look at this as a single pane of glass, and also view it as a democratic opinion and views that's been driven by people. So one thing that we have done different to most of the other framework is, yes, everyone's pretty much is trying to do the same thing, agreed. How can we get some consensus? And to get consensus, I think we need people to get involved and take action. So public intelligence is, we are proud to say, we didn't get influenced by any other framework. We know what EU was doing. In principle, we know what Microsoft was doing, what IBM was doing. We tried to sort of look at everyone and see what's the best way we can help everyone, right? So if you went with baseline 5 requirements that people say, yeah, this is something that we need to cover as a minimum, so that we have accountable and sustainable innovations for our future. And that's it. We are here not to disrupt. We are here to empower people and the innovators equally. Again, we saw that when we tried to reach to regulators, the bureaucracy takes over, and the amount of time it takes to get something in place and moving, it is long. And we are dealing with global regulation here. So how can we, in one way, empower everyone instead of going one at a time? So we went, let's people centrally support public intelligence, these 5 principles. If, by the way, people will be voting this principle, so they can say, oh, like 1, 2, 3, I don't like 4, I like 5. So they can vote all these 5 principles, or collectively the whole concept, which means with the votes, it's like an open petition, just the way you do love or anything. So it really becomes that artifact for anyone to say, yeah, this is it. I think our mission is not to disrupt what's happening, it's there to empower them and really use this as a reference. So we are running campaigns, we're taking it a slightly different angle, which is a public-driven angle. And our website was supposed to go launch law live last night, but due to some technical glitch, it might be going later this week.
Well, by the time this comes out, it'll be live.
Oh,
so
awesome.
We'll
That's
drop
great.
a link to that.
Yeah. So it's called publicintelligence.ai. Yeah, as
nice.
it would be. And we're trying to put all this, awareness tool, white paper, and everything out there, so that people feel like, yeah, I feel this is the way it should be. At this minute, people are not aware of what AI is all about. So we're trying to break it down for them. And AI really impacts everyone. So we got driverless driving. There will be there's already farmerless farming. Soon there will be teacherless teaching, thanks to extended reality and AI. And it's repeating the same thing over and over again. So just run last year's notes and modules this year. Managerless management, thanks to AI, all the calendar, meeting, this, that, admin could be done by, AI, right? There's a possibility of builderless building with, 3D printing and robotics, going out there, putting bricks and, clay and everything and just building things up. So if we don't take action now and don't work on the foundational principle, which is artificial human intelligence learns from humans, and there is a mixed opinion about it. And the mixed opinion is, first obvious one is my job will be impacted. And one concern that I always have is people say, or especially PwC's report, that clearly says 40% of the jobs will be lost by 2030. Yeah, in bold writing. Then we got another, AI campaign that says, 15 trillion contribution to the economy globally. These two don't add up. So what's happening in between? Who's taking the hit? Who's getting impacted? And who should be really taking action? Society. Every one of us, will be impacted by it, just like how Industrial Revolution has impacted the low earning or the working force at that time. With Intelligence Revolution, anyone who's got a logic or a pattern of working, that could be digitalized. And once it's digitalized, we got a big problem. Intelligence, once digitalized, could be harnessed, domesticated, and even colonized. And that has serious impact. We might create a intellectual colonization, which is, again, one of the concepts that we talk about in our white paper, how we really need to design things so that we don't get to that stage in the next decade or two. And slowly, the side effects of that we're already witnessing. If someone said, calculate what is 16 plus 7, if you're from maths background or engineering, you might, do that in your head. But others, they might open calculator and Google. And these are simple things. But think about it, in next decade or so, we might experience that heavy reliance on AI might reduce the natural human rationalization and capability. So that's another trend that we need to work with or against. What we don't want is a future generation who's so reliant on technology that if there's no Wi-Fi or 5G, they're pretty much don't know what to do.
You're toast. Yeah, and that's a fascinating one. The idea of outsourcing all of your brain power and outsourcing all of your critical thinking skills or just thinking to technology is really interesting. And I think about that sometimes, like I used to say it a lot about, smartphones and dumb people. And it feels like that sometimes. So I could see that, and especially the trend, like you talk about, if we trend more towards that, and if technology starts to be implanted in our bodies, like who we were referencing earlier, Elon Musk, wants to do or is trying to make happen, right? Then that could be very, very difficult, because it's the evolution of humans is going to start evolving towards having all of that information and not needing to think and exercise those muscles. So the other side of it, though, is that, because we don't have to think about these things, and like you were mentioning jobs that are being taken by AI, and I spoke with a woman named Sydney who is very, very deep in the RPA sphere of things, which is all about programming the robotics, or basically programming. It doesn't even have to be a robot. It can just be a program to do things, the monotonous tasks that you have to do over and over. You can program something to do that for you. And then her whole argument was that, hey, this isn't going to make someone lose their job. What it's going to do is open them up for higher level thinking, and open them up to be able to spend time on things that they don't necessarily get to spend time on, like those things at the bottom of the to-do list, because they're not like the bullet an inch away from your head, right? It's like, okay, I can put that off, and then you put it off and you put it off, and then it never gets done. But now, because you have the ability to have all of these time-consuming tasks outsourced, you're able to spend more time thinking about or focusing and spending energy on more higher level tasks that require creative thinking and that require these critical thinking aspects.
Yeah, 100%. And I think this is, again, one of our principles called purpose-driven design. So what's the purpose of this design? And really, it challenges and supports and guides innovators to think this way. What are you trying to do with this technology? And again, we have that whole calculation of, is it low scale, high impact, or high scale, high speed impact, and the value add as well. So purpose really plays a key role. And sometimes we don't realize there are some innovations Absolutely agree with what you said. But there are some innovations I want to call out. We create algorithms under the hood and we slide it under the web service or a platform. And we really don't know what these algorithms are doing, right? So there is good AI, and then there is stealth mode AI and black box AI, whichever you want to call it. And I think a good example is, well, I got a couple. one that I personally witnessed was I was flying to Stockholm, and Thomas Cook went bust. Flights that I was paying like £100 to go from my city to Stockholm was 600. So that I'm like, wait a minute, how can you explain that, right? Algorithms took advantage of Thomas Cook going down and tracking the cookies and the demand and inflated the price. And that is, I would say, not ethical. I think taking advantage of, the traffic, the people's situation, and we also saw, someone was trying to sell face masks and hand gel sanitizers when COVID kicked in at extortionate prices, and people were buying it, and it really helped them to sell even at the higher prices. And we shouldn't let such things happen with algorithms and technology. And I think we all have an accountability to be fair. We all have to think when we design algorithms in a purpose-driven fashion. What is it that we're trying to achieve? So going to the grassroots level, which is, put purpose at the heart of your design, put people at the heart of the design. And it's not there to do the bad AI things. It's there to really win trust and empower people, as you said.
Yeah, that's a great point. And getting back to the idea of the public intelligence and how you vote for different pieces of these pillars that you think are more important. I imagine that you can suggest pillars and then people can vote for them. So it really is a crowdsourced method of bringing this framework to the companies or to the masses. And so there is just one hang up in my mind is that you need a bit of like a network effect. I would imagine it's no good if it's just like 100 people that come together.
So we are partnering with partners like to name a few big brands, but government bodies. I can't disclose all of the names yet, and also be investing in terms of making this a global people-driven campaign. So the way the website is designed is like a petition that you would go, I like these principles, I support, I like this particular idea, I support, or I don't like this particular part of this idea. Maybe I can put some comments to amend or things like that. So really keeping it as transparent as possible. And anyone who supports, I think the call to action is to share it beyond, at least in their network as a minimum. And we kind of creating that little snowball effect with public intelligence launch. So and I think it really makes sense for people to own this and acknowledge this and take action. And my ambition is to get at least 1 million votes so that we can confidently go and say, look, this is it. And, we got climate issue. Now we got public intelligence as an issue. And the impact of that is pretty serious, because public intelligence, in a simple word, is something that we have curated over centuries. Our skills, our awareness, our practice, and our intelligence. We take these things for granted. Absolutely, we take it for granted. Simple things like how the wheel works, simple things like how to use knife and fork, right? But we have built monuments and wonders of the world with our intelligence. So, and we have passed it on to, next generation. We have parents who are, waiting for the kids to graduate and become doctors, lawyers, managers, or take over their business and run their manufacturing or cottage industry. So we have an ecosystem that's designed around public intelligence. The best way I can simplify this is you probably see birds flying in the sky in a formation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they do that because it reduces the drag. It helps each and everyone to sort of fly together and in an energy efficient and sustainable manner. We humans are exactly the same. So public intelligence is pretty much public right. A minute one or other thing disrupts, the whole ecosystem around it starts, seeing the impact and side effects of it. And yeah,
sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I think next 10 years or so, it will become even more prominent that we should have taken action yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's for sure. And I appreciate the idea of taking it to the masses and democratizing this framework or what is important for people. And I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit because democracies also voted for Donald Trump. And look how that happened. We all know how that turned out. So the idea here of letting people choose, is there not a little bit of a flaw or a risk in that? And I wonder if it's not better to try and get like a benevolent dictator, we could say. That's a term that's thrown around a lot in the tech circles, right? Someone who is looking out for our good, or someone who is not trying to be that like malicious dictator. They're a benevolent dictator, but at least we're not going to get the masses screaming QAnon and conspiracy theories that there has no basis in reality. And then all of a sudden, because of some social media trending topic, it becomes the most upvoted thing on your website.
Yeah, agreed. And if I wanted to put it this way, that if public intelligence is voted for what it is and what it delivers and impacts on a wider society, we could be the good dictator in a way. One thing it is for sure, when people come together, the power of people is what drives everything. I would say iPhone is not a phone until physical, or people start using it physically. It's actually a expensive paperweight waiting in the box. Social media, Facebook, for example, is not a platform until people start engaging and using it. So without people, none of these technologies work. So I think what we're trying to do with public intelligence is really calling out certain things that people don't acknowledge. Example, speaking about iPhone, iPhone keeps launching, updating, and creating, incompatible versions, and other brands do the same. Now, do we really need a 2mm thin phone with 2 more megapixel when the current handset was working absolutely fine? Your previous headset doesn't work with this, or previous. Come on, think in an accountable fashion. Think about sustainability. People don't like change. People are happy with what they have. And why would we design something that just breaks apart every year or two? And it's expensive, right? So these are the questions that we want people to really think, come on, you're just falling. And biggest client or customer is people. So people have the power. It's 7 billion population versus FTSE 500. So the odds are completely in favor of people, but people are not aware or not woken up yet to realize that. And I think we're giving them that wake-up call, which means, let's say you want to call public intelligence the good dictator, or a public intelligence party, or a campaign, which means once public intelligence is approved, we're going to do what we're doing, which is, giving innovators the opportunity to design in a fair way. And once they go through the assessment process, right, 5 principles or how many ever principles and objectives, they get a publicly approved score, right? Mm-hmm. If you're 5 out of 5, it's like a review that you have on App Store or wherever, right? Mm-hmm. And which means, you're people-driven, people-centric, and publicly approved product, and it's in benefit for them. Whereas if you get bad score, or if you haven't done it, let's say we're talking 5-10 years down the line, people can easily go and boycott a particular app because, hey, you haven't gone through this process. We can't see the transparency, and people can demand that. And I think that's the way I'm seeing, where people can actually drive innovation and take a bit more authority, because all of this really directly or indirectly impacts them in one way or the other.
Yeah, it holds brands more accountable. I can see that argument completely. And I think that's a great way of trying to do it. And what I wonder about, though, is the 5 pillars you speak of, and people who are voting on these different 5 pillars, which ones are more important. And if people start suggesting pillars that are just outrageous, but then it goes on to some subreddit, and then all of a sudden that pillar gets put up to the highest, and now we have some ridiculous pillar that's should be enforced. Are you, as public intelligence, going to step in and say, hey, this is not aligned with our morals? And so then there's a very gray area, right? Because it's like, yeah, it's by the people, for the people, but if it's too outrageous, public intelligence is going to step in.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had given 5 options, which we think covers most of the global principles and regulations. So the first one is right to intelligence. This is something that no one defines it in a clear fashion. Right to intelligence is, again, protecting people's skills and intellectual capability and creating measures so that it's not disrupted. And if they support this becomes a project on its own, more research, lobbying, and a campaign runs on it. Then the next principle is purpose-driven, which is, again, most of the ethics advisors, experts, and regulation agrees. So it's like an extract that supports them. And in purpose, there is automation, augmentation. There is fairness, accountability, all of that embedded within it, which means one principle has a lot of stuff from here and there that support. Yeah. So if someone said, "Oh, I'm not sure about bias and stuff," so it's part of purpose. Okay, accountability, again, racism, bias, and social divide, all of that embeds in there. So we have like a clear subparts of every principle, exposed on the website as well. The third one, which I mentioned, was displacement protection, which ensures how do you manage the entry of a new innovation or change of new innovation within the existing ecosystem, and how do you manage upskilling, job losses if there is any, or practice, or all that stuff around it. Risk, self-explanatory, all the risk that's associated to it, all the way from emotional, behavioral, racial bias, and all of that is all part of that. And the last one is accountable redesign. So bringing accountability in redesign process and making sure everything, all the 4 principles, is sort of embedded in your design going forward. So it's like 5 options, but it kind of covers literally the global plethora of regulations and compliance and everything and sustainability is also part of that. So when you're displacing, it asks you questions about sustainability. So if someone said, I have this to add, it either will fit in one of these 5 principles, most likely. But I think we don't want to make it too complicated either. We want to keep it as simple as possible that we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. It's the headers, and then you have the bullet points that fit into that. And so you're seeing it as something that each company is going to fill out on their own and say, hey, here's how we're doing this. And then going back to that kind of the GitHub repo, this is going to be their ethics, and they put it on their GitHub. Or they just have it on some kind of website if you want to know.
Public intelligence. So they will have this transparently available on publicintelligence.ai, where they can say, look, everyone, I just did my assessment, or I went through this process. This is how we have designed our app, right? And you can see, we are accountable, we are responsible, we are purpose-driven, and it shows, people can trust it. At this minute, everyone's designing in a black box fashion. So this is one way to bring the transparency and the trust back on with designers and innovators, and connect society to the applications really before they consume it.
Yeah, the end user, making sure that the end user is in the loop.
Yeah,
when this is happening.
Yeah, so there's a process around it where they can make this a bit more embedded in their app. They can say, hey, we got this as a score. They can transparently share that, and so we're working through that as well. So that's phase 2 of public intelligence.
And so how do you ensure that these companies aren't just gonna lie?
Yeah, so again, people driven. So if they said, hey, I am not replacing anyone's job, and if they went through that process, and if people are using it, wait a minute, you said this and it's not, they lose credibility. I think we know how weak some of these companies are. Tesla is as weak as one bad tweet. Right? So I think public have the power to sort of, challenge if something is not right, or so there will be a process around it once people have lied. We haven't got that far yet because we are still at the initial phase of getting the tool out to the public. But we're going to be crowdfunding this as well, which means with more support, we can put more energy and experts to sort of design the whole process through it. We're looking for partners who could take ownership of certain principles and sort of, expand a bit more. We only have 150 questions at this minute across 5 principles. But we're trying to make it really refined and really seamless and smooth as well, and effective, without making this a very a difficult governance process. It should be a bit more, like a guided tool for any innovators to get started with.
And do you feel there's scope for, would it be a third party eventually that comes in and does this to the company so that you can ensure that trust is there? Or are you just going to expect the companies to do it and then hope that they don't get found out later if they're lying?
Yeah, so I think we haven't got to that stage yet. We open for companies to run it by themselves or some third party on their behalf if needed, as long as that brand or product has gone through that process. From our side, there is one little check that we would request them to do is when they publish this score, it will obviously go public, but our team, we're thinking of having 3 reviewers to review that before it goes live. Again, 3 independent reviewers so that my view and that person's view don't clash. And if they clash, it should be a good clash, and we can challenge the innovators as well. So it's not something that we will take it, on its face value. It's something that we really want to ensure that people are doing the right thing for the society.
And if someone wants to get involved, how can they go about doing that?
We're open and reach us out, and we are absolutely running on a tight budget, on a lean, running with a lean team, and this is something that we passionately believe in. So we spend a good amount of time and energy to get to this stage. But more the merrier. And we are looking for project leads and partners to sort of take ownership of certain elements. We have legal firms who are trying to look into the right to intelligence side of things. If someone has already an existing framework, it really helps sort of, give them guidance of, this is our source, this is our partner, and we're sort of working on some of these elements with them. So just get in touch with us. Our email address is publicintelligence@airtechnorth.uk.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like we mentioned before, the website should be up
Yeah.
by the time this goes out. And I think it's an incredible dream. And I really hope that one day we can see that. I think there are many of us that are begging for more transparency.
Yeah.
And this feels like a great way to get that transparency, especially from the companies that we're using on a day-to-day basis. And it will help us be able to vote which companies we stand for,
Yeah.
which company. And it's right now, I think the problem with the companies saying they're ethical is that it's easy to say that, and it's easy to come up with some marketing ploy around it, right? Like I think about Apple and how they talked about, oh, well, because of sustainability measures, now we're not going to give you our charging brick. But then in the new iPhones, my wife just got one, and it comes with a USB-C cable, so it doesn't work with any of our old bricks. So I got to buy a brick anyway.
Yeah, and this is exactly my point. Again, going back to the purpose-driven and displacement protection. Why do we have these many chargers? Yeah. Why has Apple decided to just stick to their box standard charger for these many years and contributing to us, the emission and climate problem, and doubling the amount of charger waste?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
I think the answer is sometimes just simple, and just to create their own USP and monopoly, and because they have the monopoly, they can do that. And I think they don't realize at the other end is people who are suffering, people who are actually paying, good £1,200 for a brand new handset every 2 years, and this is just not sustainable. And every displacement, what about the old handset? That's an expensive paperweight. Yeah, completely. And that's just one example. And we're doing the same with every other, innovation out there. Cars, washing machines.
Yeah, across all industries.
All industry. And the globalization is just going to kill the planet at this rate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am on the same page. I think that it's very, very pertinent right now. We need to look at what we're doing and figure out what the best way forward should be. And so I really appreciate you trying to at least make that happen in a way that involves the whole humanity, we could say, if we get to that point, right? It will involve everyone, and everyone has a voice.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Sherin, thank you so much for coming on here. I have one last question.
Sure.
Are you a robot?
I wish I was, because I need 10 of me. Wish I could clone myself. But no, I'm not. But I absolutely appreciate what you guys are doing. I wish I was a robot, because I feel there's so much to do, so much to serve and have a positive impact, out there in the real world. And something which I can't personally stand is we're witnessing a digital robbery of intelligence and our hard-earned skills that we will witness in next decade or so, and our generations will be suffering massively. And someone needs to take this call. So I wish I was a robot.
I love the way your mind works, and thank you so much for coming on here.
Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you. It was a pleasure.